Hello, this is week 5. It is the 1st of May. Um, yeah, all right, gonna switch to share screen. Okay, let's get that out of the way. All right, yeah, I'm gonna actually, how do I do chat from here? Um, gonna put oops, I'm gonna put the link to the slideshow in chat. There we go. Going back to share screen. Okay. All right. So today's topic is time in comics. We talked a little bit about time last week or a couple weeks ago. Uh, and so there's a little bit of retreading, but trying not to overlap too much. All right. So what is time? There's a couple definitions I have here. Time is the indefinite continued progress of existence and events that occur in apparently irreversible succession from the past through the present to the future, according to Wikipedia. The second definition is time is the distance between being born and being buried. Time is the seconds you spend laughing, the hours you spend talking, and the lifetime you spend loving. Time is how long you stare into his eyes and tell him you love him. Time is how long you sit in your room crying when he hurts you. Time is how long it takes you to find someone who cares. Time is moving on. Time is what you live off of. Use your time wisely because once it's gone forever. Urban Dictionary. Yeah, I like to throw in Urban Dictionary definitions. Um, it is depressing, but yeah, I don't know. It's fun to throw in these silly Urban Dictionary definitions. So yeah, we went over 4D in art a little bit. Again, two-dimensional art, which is pictured here, is art that exists on the plane and that's it. On the two-dimensional plane, three-dimensional art, 3D space, in theory, you could walk around it. It exists as a 3D object. Sometimes it's flattened to 2D as it is here. And 4D indicates motion, indicates time, even though scientifically that's not accurate. That's how we talk about that in art. All right. So 4D art, new media, new genres. So those are all kind of the same thing. Um, let me explain. So the class I teach in the fall term are 122 Foundations in Motion 4D. We do video and animation, and I try to include video games. So 4D art, again, is just basically art that moves, it has motion. Time is important to it. However, within different schools, they can use the terms new media or new genres. Basically, this paragraph shows a list of what that encompasses. It's a really silly, kind of stupid term because it's technically new in context of the history of human art, but it's not. A lot of these things aren't really new. Digital art's decades old, computer graphics, same thing. Robotics is included somehow, 3D printing is included somehow, sound art. Um, which is different than music. I don't ask me to explain that, but it's there. So yeah, basically 4D art or new media and new genres refer to these sort of non-traditional ways of making artwork. Um, yeah, when I was looking at other colleges, they had these three different things, or just digital art sometimes, which is also pretty broad. So it's a weird, confusing umbrella term that just kind of groups things together. Obviously, old people made them. So that's what it is. Okay. So video art. As I promised, we'd talk a little bit about video art. Um, okay. So video art is basically making artwork with videos, which makes a lot of sense. This sort of started with the advent of the Sony Portapack, which is what's pictured here. Yeah, so this is basically the most not freely available, but available to the public video recording device, not including film, but we're talking about video here. So a lot of artists took that up. And the reason that happened is because studio cameras are not really accessible to the everyday person. Tens of thousands of dollars for each one. Obviously, not very portable. Um, a lot of maintenance if it breaks down, and probably a lot of other stuff. I have no idea how it operates, So once studio cameras, or sorry, once these portable cameras became available, the everyday person could use video, which was pretty revolutionary. And so, yeah, so this gave artists a chance to experiment with motion, content, and length. So think about these sort of studios like CBS here, for example. They're not going to let anyone just use these cameras, and TV, like right away after television was invented. It was sort of turned into a vehicle for advertisements. And so television's basically like programming for revenue, basically for profit. Um, I'm not being cynical. That's like literally what happened. So, and basically, like TV shows exist to promote commercials and stuff. It's weird. Um, at least it used to. I don't know about the infrastructure now, but capitalism. So yeah, so because there is these sort of guidelines and restraints from these large companies, they wouldn't really put out anything out of the ordinary. So again, when artists got a hold of these, they could really play with the format of what was possible using video, right? Um, so length is the biggest, is well, not the biggest. It's like a big thing because you could record something for hours and hours, like Andy Warhol did of the Empire State Building, which is a 7 or 8 hour film of slowly zooming into the Empire State Building. I've definitely never watched the whole thing, but it's kind of boring, but maybe meditative, who knows? So yeah, so those things weren't really possible with broadcasts and TV news stations. So again, this revolutionized the way artists could work. Okay, so I'm just going to show the first of this. So this is playing with the technology that was available. This is using green screen, which I believe everyone is familiar with, meaning that things that are a certain color, such as like a bright green or a bright blue, those that could be edited out, and another image replaces it. So I'm going to show the first of 3 transitions of this video, 3 transitions by Peter Campus from 1973. Sounds not important here, though. I'll turn it up anyways. Okay, so yeah, so again, he's using green screen. What's happening here is he's making a all right, so right now, he's on the other side of this wall of paper, um, and there's a live feed pointing at him, right? And then that live feed is being projected onto this paper that we see here. So it is kind of confusing and kind of cool, but um, it's definitely worth watching a few times. So yeah, this is him putting on blue makeup that turns that invisible and puts another video underneath. And this is him burning a piece of blue paper. As you can see, it's a live video feed. So yeah, kind of playing with the technology that he has. Okay, this is William Wegman. Hold on just a second. Okay, 209. Um, so William Wegman's kind of a very well, actually, I'm just gonna um go to one short video.
One response when you know that dies. I think Randy's gonna be sick.
Um,
Crooked finger, crooked stick. It's my favorite one of all time without a dog. Wow, neat finger. Boy, is that crooked? Oh, that's nothing. You ought to see my stick. Wow, is that neat? I don't know how I thought of that.
so yeah, basically William Wegman, um, who for the quiz you need to know that he had his dogs featured on Sesame Street. He played a lot with semantics, basically how language is is perceived, how we talk to each other, um, and how that applies to images as well. So going back to this Randy is sick one, it says you can hear one person talking, which is William Wegman, but he's moving these lamps in an anthropomorphic manner, so that the viewer connects. Oh, this is the lamp talking about another lamp, you know. And obviously, the lamps can't talk, but we make those connections in our brain as humans. Um, this is like this is one of his unfortunately dogs that passed away, who just made sounds with microphones. Here's him quote unquote teaching his dogs a spelling lesson. So a lot of it played with like humorous little skits that played with like perception and humans' ability to connect things, um, and like what is going on here, like what is the meaning behind it, like why do these things certain things have certain powers, right? Let's go back to the spelling lesson. Like certainly he's saying like you spelled this word wrong. Certainly the dog didn't actually spell anything out in this book, but he sort of implied that he did, um, by just talking about it, right? So it's he has a lot of interesting, funny artwork that I recommend watching this whole video and just checking out more of his work. He has some really great paintings where he puts a bunch of postcards onto one piece of paper or one canvas and then like blends them together in a funny way. Anyways, yeah, he was a really early influential video artist. I think he's still alive. Um, all right, and this is Nathaniel Dorsky. So unfortunately, like you have to rent his um or lease out his films in order to see them, which is like tens of thousands of dollars, which is kind of bad, but it's his choice. So a lot of his work, which is usually a lot more still than this, is at least to me it just shows moving images, video as beautiful things within themselves. right? So when I saw his work in a theater about 10 years ago, like the whole thing was silent. There was nothing going on. You could hear people when they sneezed or when their tummy rumbled. Um, you could hear all of that in the theater. So imagine watching a movie with zero sound. Um, it was interesting, but it was one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen. So for me, it's basically videos as paintings. They're just beautiful. You can find meaning in them. You don't have to, but um, I didn't try to find meaning. I just enjoyed them. This is Bruce Nauman. I'm doing more of the conceptual kind of art, stamping in the studio. He does exactly what the video says. He says he does. So, yeah, this quote here: "If I was an artist and I was in the studio, then whatever I was doing in the studio must be art." At this point, art became more of an activity and less of a product. So he talked about like performance basically, and video was the best way for him um uh, to document that basically. We'll talk about performance more in several slides from now. Okay, so this is later, like 30, 40 years later or something, 2007, when reality TV shows were like really, really hot. Um, just watch for about a minute.
I'm co-founder. Yes. Co-founder? Yes. Yes. Thank you. Live reproductions on top of shit, always in the moment. Always, always, always. Right now. So cool. Never in the past. We show you your life, but better. With edit. With edit. Because we know right now, and we know how to make things happen right now. Basically practice all day long. It's exhausting. And you need to.
Okay, that's enough. So basically this video is about, at least this part of the video is about these girls hired, um this is Pasta and that's M Peggy, to film their lives and make it look better than it really is. Of course, that mirrors reality TV. Things aren't exactly as they seem. This is a full 2 hour video. I have not seen the whole thing. I've seen like a 5 minute portion of this like over and over and over again, and it took me a long time to really understand what was going on. Um, but yeah, this is like, as you can see, it was heavily over edited. Um, like, let me find like this part, which I'm not gonna unmute because it has, I don't know what song, but like something that would probably be struck by copyright. Um, yeah, just super over editing. It's all about visual overwhelming you. Um, just too much stuff going on. And again, like I said, it took me several times to sort of understand what was going on here. But now I know it pretty well. So yeah, and then one more that I'm not going to show is, don't worry, there's no genitals there. This is a body horror. Um, actually, I'm going to show a little bit. It's just like this little bit. Um, so you can see it's like sort of this realistic computer generated stuff using, this blurry and noisy filter. It's a combination of music video and video art. Like, what are the definitions of video? What are the definitions of music video? What's the definition of art? Hi. Of course, as with most things in this class, there is no clear definition, and which is both good for the expansion of like, oh, what can this be, but also like hard to categorize. So yeah, Rubber Johnny is interesting, um, because it really blurs that lines, and it makes you think like, well, what makes music videos, not video art. There, when I've taken a video art class like 3 times because I loved it so much, and we didn't talk about music videos, which to me in hindsight is kind of weird. Like, why wouldn't it be video art? And what differentiates that between like video art? What's the difference between that and sort of like family videos or commercials or whatever? I would probably say like something like intent, where a video art is meant to be more of an artistic intent, whatever that means. Um, whereas like family home videos, that would be more like memories, like a document, and commercials would be something, and music videos would be more like promoting something to gain exposure and stuff like that. So intention does make a difference, but since intentions aren't always knowable, things become pretty blurry in that sense. Okay, here's a summary of video art, basically. Again, this is the art assignment, which is the best art channel, period. It's worth looking at for sure. I think it's like 15 minutes or so. Now for animation. Okay, so these are all bears, obviously, and bears in 3 different types of animation. All right, so animation is a series of images or drawings made to appear as if moving. All right, on the top right is traditional animation. On the bottom right is stop motion, and the bottom left is computer animation, which are things that y'all are probably familiar with in some way or form because they're all ubiquitous. Traditional animation. So this is more or less drawing things frame by frame. This can be done traditionally with pencil and paper, or pen and paper, or it can be done digitally. Even though that's digital, it's still considered traditional animation because you're doing it, you're hand drawing it frame by frame. There's of course hybrids and exceptions to this. Who Framed Roger Rabbit's a famous example of live action and traditional animation coming together. But yeah, so it's very, very time consuming. I will tell you that, even though I haven't done a whole lot. Keyframes. So keyframes are are points in a quote unquote timeline, meaning basically the editing board of an animation or a video, where basically something changes. So even though this is kind of blurry, all these white dots right here, these are called keyframes. And what these indicate is something is changing when this green play thing, this is called a playhead, when this hits this white thing, this change happens, and this is the graph where it happens. So this is the editing part of this visual of the ball going different places. I don't know which one the ball is, honestly. Which line in the graph is the ball? I don't know. This is just a lot of keyframes because there's a lot of stuff going on. Keyframes as a concept, it does take a while to get used to, but even as a video student, but yeah, so every time something changes, like the ball changes direction, it grows smaller, it grows larger, that's called a keyframe. The moment that it changes. Okay. Tweening. All right, so tweening is an interesting way to do animation. Okay, it's short for in-betweening, and it's sort of something that only computers do. So on this example here, on the right hand side, you can see there's this animation of this slime creature doing a dance. It's quote unquote traditional. It's done digitally, but it's done by hand each frame by frame. You can tell this because of the imperfections and that it's not like I don't know, 100 frames per second or whatever, right? Where on the left, it has this perfect smooth movement where let's just say it's 60 frames per second. I don't think it is. I think it's more like 30 or 40. No, I think it's 30. So what we're looking at here is we're putting in keyframes, which means uh like when this hair blob is on the most left, that's a keyframe. When the hair blob is on its most right, there's a keyframe. When the hair blob is um at the center, that's another keyframe. So what tweening does is it takes the information from one keyframe, like say here, and this keyframe, and sort of blends it together. So the transition from the left keyframe to the middle keyframe is seamless. Okay, and again, you don't have to like let's say if you have um a character doing a backflip and it's 60 frames per second, you don't have to hand animate every single thing. You can basically make keyframes on the most important points on that and let the computer fill in the gaps. Okay. Again, that might be slightly confusing, but it's kind of important to know. 3D computer, I should have given a body horror spoiler warning for the left-hand side. So yeah, computer animation is pretty obvious what it does. Doing everything within the computer. This can be easy, this can be difficult and intricate, pretty much like any form of animation, but the richer you want your things to look, the harder it is, just like everything else in life. But again, a lot of this can use tweening to sort of not automate everything, but automate the points in between the important keyframes. Okay. Stop motion. So this is using animation in a real life setting. I don't think it's possible to do it in a computer in any sense. I might be proven wrong at some point, but yeah, stop motion is a way of taking an inanimate object. Um, maybe a living being can be stop motion, but I don't really. That would be an outlier, something you wouldn't normally consider. So most of the time, I would say, yeah, I would say 99% of the time, stop motion is actually just photos, or stills from um, video or film capture, usually. So here we see, I think this is Coraline. I can't remember exactly, but you can see that this person, like, what are they doing to this poor character, right? Coraline, thanks, Jade. Um, yeah, what is he doing to Coraline right now? So he's actually animating her and animating her as if she's reacting to what he's doing to her. Um, Obviously, Coraline's not real. Sorry. But 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 the way this person's making these like basically blocks of, I don't know what she's made of, wood, clay, whatever, um, plastic. He's animating to make them come to life. So yeah, this is sort of, yeah, it's like puppetry in a sense. This is done many ways, and many of the times like the person is edited out. In this case, it's not, because it's sort of a um, meta joke, right? But this next example is definitely makes more sense. So claymation is a form of stop motion animation, right? And this is being taken with photos. I can tell because the exposure changes slightly. It's You might not know this unless you're a nerd like me, but basically, um, we know that Clay can't talk, or he doesn't talk here, but Clay can't move on its own, doesn't have expressions. So, um, Yes, the hand is there, but the hand is not there for everything. Like this clay um cannot expand from this one point to the rest of his body, right? So there's a lot of things that aren't being shown here that but some of it is with the hand. So it's kind of an interesting hybrid. All right, so there's a couple parts of this. The armature is a skeleton, where you put um, the clay on top of. So it basically is like not only good for using less clay, but also for something solid because clay, depending on how much clay you use in your application, things might fall apart. Um, Plus, it's easier to move things with like this wire, this bendable wire. So that's why um, a lot of claymation uses this sort of armature. So it's not just fully clay. Right. So, yeah, it's the reason claymation's a thing is because it's easily moldable, right? Whereas with something like Coraline, for every different expression, there's a different head. Assuming she's made out of like plastic or something like that. You can't just mold plastic like you can with clay. And so with beginning stop motion animators, clay's a good choice to make. If you have a large studio and a large budget, you might go with something more realistic or less moldable because you have to make a lot of different heads, for example. Rotoscoping, this is one of my favorite things in animation. So rotoscoping is taking basically video footage and drawing on top of it in order to make an animation. So yeah, so when you see animation that looks very real like this, it's usually because the artist or the animator has drawn on top of existing video footage. So this is something I did really quickly. It took me like half an hour to do this with just basic scribbles. Um, just drawing on top of different frames. Yeah, it takes a long time. And on the bottom left here, here's an excerpt from Waking Life, which is a movie about dreams and consciousness. It's really cool. And pretty much everything here is drawn, or sorry, rotoscoped. Why would you do this? Part of the reason is because you might want to make something look cool, but it also might be because you can do things that are impossible in real life, such as this, and why not use computer graphics? Well, it's a different style. It's sort of more cartoonish, so it gives this weird feeling of um, being fake, but also looking sort of real. And it really confuses our brains because people can't draw that well. And why is it the animation so perfect? So it does have a really bizarre effect on human brains, and that's why I love it. Stop motion versus video. Okay, so why would you use that instead of video? Basically to do things that are impossible, right? So on the top right, here's this kid making a skateboard off of his friend or enemy, I guess. Obviously, like this kind of stuff isn't going to happen in real life. You can't. Humans don't move like that. Similarly, on the bottom left, this guy can't really float from his car to the swimming pool. Um, so so yeah, it's just fun ways of messing with reality while using photos. Um, and yeah, of course, it differentiates itself from just traditional animation because you're using real life photos or real life situations. Um, and which makes it kind of more interesting because it's like, oh yeah, that's impossible. So something must be going on. Humans are curious, humans do interesting things. So of course this is going to be invented. But notice on the top right hand, these are done with photos. The exposure changes, which means it gets like lighter and darker from frame to frame sometimes. And this is funny using videos for stop motion because even though there's tiny little clips, like a fraction of a second for when he's floating in the air, you can still use that for stop motion. And 99% of the time it's going to be photos, but this is an exception where they use video for this. And it works very well in this sense because when you go from photos to videos, something in the format might change, like the lens size might be different, the field of view, the field of view, the exposures, the f-stops, all sorts of weird stuff can change. So that's an interesting thing about using video. You'll just have to do really, really quick things. But it maintains consistency between the real life footage, which is when he gets out of the car, and when he enters the pool. Pretty interesting stuff. Here's Courage the Cowardly Dog, an animation of him as an eggplant. Connect sculpture. Again, I mentioned this last class, I believe. Connect sculpture is a form of making things move in sculpture form. It's very difficult, but it's even more difficult to maintain. Oops, didn't mean to make it play. Again, here's Strandavis by Theo Jansen. Wind-powered things, which are kind of scary. Performance art. Okay, so let's just talk about this image first. Rest Energy by Marina Abramovic and Ule. Marina Abramovic was popular like 10 years ago because of the whole artist is present thing, where people sat and looked at her, and she sat there for hours and hours and hours and didn't say anything. So regular people became part of the artwork. So anyways, that's a little. So before that time, she and her then partner Ule made a lot of performance art together. This is one of them. Obviously it's just a photo, but you can see that it is also kind of an intense performance, right? Because here he is holding the arrow straight at her heart while she's holding the bow. An ultimate trust exercise, because if someone messes up, then she's gonna die. Um, but yeah. So like I don't know how long this lasted, but um, I think they did durational performances like this. So performance art again is doing a performance, usually using the body. I would say 99% of the time. So the actual artwork in this performance and most performance art is happening in person and in real time. So basically, in order to really view the art in its best way, you have to be there when it happens. Okay, so we have things like this, like photographs of performance art. We have videos of performance art, because that's what's necessary to document things. Otherwise, people can just make things up, and you have to go by on their word. Sometimes that does happen, but that usually only happens when these artists are established as doing real things. So yeah, it's a really interesting space because again, you really technically need to be there in order to really experience it. And the reason artists would do this is because they just want something that happens right there, that can't necessarily, the experience can't be bought or sold. However, the documentation can. But when you have the documentation, it's different because that doesn't necessarily mean you were there. Just like any other photo that you take of a memory, you have to kind of be there in order to really truly experience it. Okay, need to hurry up. So yeah, it's often used metaphorically. It's never really just like, haha, look at these two people just like doing this stupid stunt. What differentiates what differentiates this and Jackass? Intent, maybe, who knows? So yeah, and again, duration is important. It's I've never seen an artwork that doesn't depend on something happening. And when something happens, that requires time. Unlike paintings, for example. Uh, relational aesthetics, basically, it's this weird theory stuff, but basically, it's an art practice where someone does something that deals with like either community or other people. And it's sort of artistic. Like this is my quote unquote online friend, Neil Daigle Oriens. It's called conversion therapy. It's a play on the anti-gay conversion therapy, where he sort of talks about being gay, being pressured to try to be straight, and sort of deconstructs that and puts art in it. So like yeah, like I said here, the theory behind it is really ridiculous, but some of the stuff that happens can be really cool. It's just when people intellectualize things, it just can kind of ruin things. Video games, 5D. Um, we're gonna do a whole lecture on this, so I'm gonna skip it for now. But I just want to show an image of one of the best video games ever, Algebra Action, that everybody knows. Not just kidding. Movies again. This is a different department that I don't really talk about. I want to show some high cinema. So here's Sharknado, or Sharknado 2, actually. This is the oldest surviving film, which I believe I showed, and the precursor to that. Time is represented in still images. So we talked about this, how there is a long exposure, and this was the first person captured on film. Here is a similarly long exposure. This is actually in Portland, Oregon, Burnside Skate Park, which, if you're not familiar, is the most famous skate park in the world because it was featured in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1. So yeah, so this is basically what this image is a skateboarder going around the park and holding a light. So you can see like the light, like all the light appears at once. How does that happen? So basically, a skateboarder goes around the park and the light is so bright that it shows up on the camera's film. But since the skateboarder's dark compared to the light, he doesn't show up. So so the reason why like all of this shows up and the skateboard doesn't show up is because these are also lights, right? And they're illuminating this. You would think that the skateboarder might show up a little bit, being illuminated by the light, but he doesn't. So in order to make this happen, you basically have to open the shutter for, let's say, 2 minutes to let the skateboarder go around and around. Okay. Whereas on the other hand, this album cover for Yeah Yeah Yeah's It Splits, this is an instant, right? So this is obviously something done with flash. And the reason it's done with flash is because the camera, to capture this small moment of time, let's say 1/5000th of a second, which we can't really perceive with our human eyes that quickly. There needs to be enough light for the camera to take in. So if we were trying to take that photo like at nighttime at this, it would just be completely black. But we need to illuminate it as much as possible in order to get anything in our cameras. So basically, the longer a shutter in a camera is open, the more light comes in. The shorter the instant, the less light comes in. So again, since the shutter's only open for, let's say, 1/5000th of a second for this, we need to compensate with a lot of light in order to make it show up. Okay. So yeah, this is basically what I just said. The slow shutter, we have this sort of motion blur effect, right? Where like it looks like it's going fast, as opposed to this fast shutter speed where this is moving, but it's captured instantaneously. And here's what it looks like in the middle of those two things. So yeah, even though this looks like it's going by faster, it's because the lens is open longer and it's recording more of the motion. and more of the light comes in. There's a lot more technicality to this kind of thing that is not necessary for this class. Um, so motion blur representing on the canvas. How do we know this is representing motion and not a puppy with many legs? If you look at it literally, you can see it as a puppy with many legs, with 4 leashes, with the owner having a bunch of feet. But we as humans know that's not real. It's not a weird puppy. So think about yourself why this represents motion. That's something I want you to think about on your own. Here's multiple frames in one image. A puppy jumping. So another question for y'all. Does this image show time at all? Why or why not? Think about it and try to justify it to yourself or reason with yourself why it may or may not show time. Okay, the next slide. What about this one? This one's way more abstract, right? So maybe it is of a building. How much time is passing here, right? And how does that different from this, which is probably just, a moment? How do these two differ in terms of time? That's something philosophical I want you to think about. There's no perfect answer to this, of course. All right, comics. I'm probably going to go over time today. Well, I'll try to get through this quickly. Yeah, so comics, I love. They're very misunderstood, and I misunderstood them completely until like 4 or 5 years ago, and I'll explain that. So what is definition of comic? Of course, there's multiple definitions. Of course, there's no easy answer. So here's a few given. Wikipedia, Will Eisner with sequential art. Scott McCloud, Understanding Comics, has this long sentence, which is more precise. And Urban Dictionary, of course, with the most fun one, is a novel, but with visuals and speech bubble dialogue that make it more interesting and fun to read. Oh. Volume scratchy. Sorry. Let me know if it's still scratchy. But yeah, so this is a paragraph in Wikipedia with a bunch of citations, of course, like what people differently define comics as. So it's not easy to define. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So going back to Scott McCloud, he wrote and illustrated this book, Understanding Comics, which more or less legitimized comics in the broader public view, broader academic view, and broader artistic view. So it's not just about comics, it's about visuals, it's about symbolism, semantics. I showed the different line art that he did. So I would say the most important takeaway is that he says that comics is a medium. So it's important because I didn't realize that until like 2019. So it's not just a style of drawing. It's not just superheroes. It's not just a daily comic strip. It can take infinite amount of forms, basically. So here's some of the different types of comics. So the comic strip, of course, is what appears in newspapers and sometimes books. Basically, this is a serial form, SERIAL, basically meaning a series of things, right? And comic strips generally take the form of 3 or 4 panels, which we'll talk about later. And we go from left to right in the Western world, and it has images and most of the time dialogue or text, right? And they tell stories or they tell jokes. Comic books, just FYI, these 2 comics I just searched for worst comic book covers, and this is 2 of the things that came up that were kind of weird. So comic books is is basically a form in itself. A bunch of small issues of like, I don't know, less than 100 pages, probably less than 40. I don't know. Um, there's a lot of them, like this Foo Fighters. Where's the number here? I don't know. I can't find it. But the number here, it's number 10. So this is a 10th in a series of I don't know how many, but it's a continuous story that happens throughout many publications, and they're pretty cheap, although less cheap as time goes on. Graphic novels. So graphic novels is a contentious term. So the reason for that is because some people feel that saying graphic novel is trying to distance itself from the world of comics, because comics are seen as like too lowbrow pop culture, which again is kind of a classist kind of thing. So some people might use graphic novels in that sense. However, I think graphic novels make sense in the sense that they're novels but told in more graphic form. So um so yeah, so some people can use it as a way to put other comics down, which is completely stupid, but sometimes it's literally just a story, a novel, a book, but just mostly told through pictures and dialogue. So uh, there's interesting discourse, but I think don't think it's very interesting at all, to be honest. It just makes sense when used as a book form, but doesn't make sense as trying to make yourself look better than other types of comics. Manga is Japanese comics. They're more closely related to the comic books I talked about earlier. I don't think there's any like specific difference between comic books and manga, just that they're Japanese. I'm not an expert, but they're also often connected with anime, which is animated shows. So yeah, I'm definitely far from an expert on this, but yeah, they have their own little section because some people look specifically for manga as opposed to comic books. Webcomic makes sense exactly what it is. The Scott McCloud's book Understanding Comics, he made a second book after that called Reinventing Comics that talked a lot about um, how comics can operate on the internet. Some of it's kind of obsolete, but it's still pretty interesting. Um, Talks a lot about access to it, like should people pay for online comics? Patreon exists, so that's a thing. A lot of people put it on for free, put them up for free. You can do anything with that's possible on the computer. It doesn't have to be a drawing, could be computer graphics, whatever. Um, so yeah, webcomics can be very interesting. All right, gag strips, editorial cartoons, and political cartoons. Basically, one panel comics. So some people will differentiate this from comics. Some people say comics need to have a sequence, meaning more than one panel. Some people consider it, well, it's kind of just the same. It just happens to have one panel, right? Like Family Circus, um, if anyone knows what that is. So yeah, that's sort of a debate that will never be resolved is, do these count as comics or not? It's your personal definition of what comics is and what comics can include. All right, the Bayeux Tapestry from probably 11th century. We don't know for sure. It's a sequence of images that tell a story. I believe there's 87 separate stories here. It's much bigger than what's pictured here, by the way. So yeah, they're images. They're told in sequence, and there's text that goes along with it. Like they take the form of comics, but it's a tapestry. It's woven. It's not drawn. So again, this is like up to your personal interpretation. Does this count as a comic or not? Um, or because there's many reasons why it could. There's many reasons why it could not, based on time, based on definition, based on medium. whatever you think. Same thing with stained glass in churches. The Stations of the Cross, a lot of churches or Catholic churches, which I grew up in a Catholic church, have these in stained glass, which is the story of Jesus being condemned to death. And I think rising is part of it. I'm not entirely sure. I clearly don't go to the church anymore. um, but yeah, so this is sort of considered a wordless comic. Um, but I don't know if it's a comic. Oh, someone said it's not a comic because comics are one-to-one, meaning like they're only meant for one person to see at a time. And that's how they define books as well. Like it's not a book if it's written on the wall because more than one person can read it at a time. I think that was the most interesting case for it, this not being a comic, but I don't know if I agree with it. Okay, so let's pry comics apart a little bit. So again, comics is a medium. It's not cartooning. Okay, so on the right is a type of illustration that simplifies form, right? So this obviously isn't a photorealistic photo of a bear. It's a very cartoonish drawing of a bear. And we know we can see the form of the bear in it. I don't have to describe that. But there's no actual fur here, so how do we know this isn't a gummy bear? Sometimes details are left out, and it just makes more sense that it would be a cute cartoon bear who's happy. Obviously, a real life bear wouldn't be happy in this environment. But yeah, cartooning sort of simplifies things. It makes things easier to read. It takes away unnecessary details most of the time. And here on the bottom left hand side is a photo comic. So yeah, this is definitely a comic. That creator intended it as such. I personally consider it to be a comic, but it doesn't have cartooning as a form, right? So even though it doesn't have cartooning, it's still a comic. So that's an important distinction, is that comics don't have to be cartoons. Comics don't have to be funny. So uh, so there's a long history behind the definition of comics. But this is a book, for example, that is sad. It's about Andrew Nielsen's wife, their life together, and she's dead. So it's kind of sad. I haven't read it personally, but I've read about it. Um, yeah, so comics doesn't have to be funny whatsoever. Even comic strips like Doonesbury, especially after 9/11, those were pretty intense and emotional and not funny at all. Sometimes I forgot his name, Gary Trudeau, he threw punchlines in there, sometimes not. So again, comics don't have to be funny, no matter what form. Um, Intentions I'm talking about. Some like there's obviously comics that are not funny, even though they're supposed to be. So here are some elements of comics. All right, illustration. Um, I think this is that absolute baseline with comics, that every comic has to have illustration. I don't want to set that in stone because there might be exceptions that might make sense, but I would say 99%, 0.999% of the time, comics need illustration. Sometimes individual panels don't need an illustration. It could just be a few words for dramatic effect. But yeah, so that it kind of holds the comics thing together, right? Because if you just have text on the page, that's just prose or poetry. But once you have illustration, that really turns it into a comic. Pretty much you can confidently call it a comic. Texts. So yeah, it's not always necessary, as you can see here, but it's common, and sometimes a comic only makes sense with text in it. This is an example. If you take all the text away, you have a lamp and a fan oscillating, um in 2 panels, and then if you took away the text here, it would just be blank. It wouldn't make any sense, right? So here the text gives these images meaning. And this 4th panel, like I mentioned, this doesn't have any images at all. It's just text. So yeah, text is less important, but also can be super important, or it doesn't have to be there at all. Panels. So these are the little, for what we'll call units of a comic, right? They're like little windows into this world. Basically, um, we understand them as sequences. We've grown up with them. The way our brains work, how we see like a sentence is a sequence of words. We see comic as a sequence of images. Pretty much the same thing. And we don't see each individual word as separate weird things. We see things as a whole because we're humans and we put things together. Unusual use of panels. This is from the comic Whim, rest in peace, that play with comic structure. So, or panel structure, sorry. So this is one panel, this is a second panel, this is a third panel, sort of deconstructed. Here's 3 panels like that. 3 panels as if they're 3D objects and we're looking at them from behind, as an aquarium, as folders, as a sculpture, subtractive. Okay, so the gutter. So this is an important part of comics. It's the space between the panels. So this is the example that Scott McCloud gives. So this first panel has a guy with an axe looking angry, looking like he's about to swing it. He says, "Now you die." And the other guy, who looks frightened and vulnerable, yells, "No, no." And then the next panel, we have this shot of downtown something with the moon, and then this screeching looking text that says, "Yeah." Okay, so I mean, most of us are going to picture, yeah, this guy just chopped this other dude up, right? However, when you look at it, like, you can separate them. The first panel is an action panel. The second panel could be like just someone randomly saying this, or a cat screeching or something like that, or someone not getting hit by a car. We don't see what actually happens. So this is sort of where the reader comes in. So even though this is kind of quote unquote nothing, a blank space in between these 2 panels, this is extremely important, right? Because again, this is where the viewer comes in. The viewer makes assumptions between the panels. So, yeah, we could have like 100 frames of this, like in very, very, very slow motion, um, to show him chopping this dude up and this dude yelling, right? But since we only have these 2 frames, we have to use our imagination as humans in order to make a connection between these 2 things. So again, even though this is just technically a blank space, comics can't really exist without them, unless you include gag comics or gag strips. So yeah, so same thing with this one here. So here's this. If you see it as 4 separate things, you'll see a gorilla within this milk pan or whatever, and it says "Listen, kid," and then you have this text and dialogue. It's a different picture, different view, um, blah blah blah. So we can see these as 4 separate images that are kind of similar but disconnected. But again, because we're humans, we like to make connections even in things that don't exist. But clearly, the author is trying to make a comic with a sequence, right? And we read it from top left to top right, bottom left to bottom right, right? Obviously, the grill is melting. So, so again, the gutter is where the viewer comes in. It creates the relationship between the author and the viewer. Speech bubble, thought bubble, caption. So here we go. This is from XKCD, a very nerdy comic. So this top dialog box, which is often has a circle around it, is dialogue, speech bubble, which is within the universe, aka diegetically. This person is saying something that everyone around them can hear. This cloud represents a thought bubble. Only this person can think this within the universe. Okay, and this last one, this caption, no one in here can hear that or see that within the universe. Okay, and it's outside of the frame. So the thing they all have in common is we as viewers can see this. So we have this extra knowledge that the characters don't have. So this is, again, the knowledge that everyone has in this panel, but only this person has this knowledge and only we have this knowledge. That's just a comic that I like. Give a man a fish and then don't finish the the wisdom. Anyways, representing motion. So comics are static, obviously. So how do we represent motion? This is kind of more on the cartooning side of things. So basically we use lines to indicate when motion's happening. And how panels function in regards to time. So how much time exists in each of these panels, right? So from here to here, you can see it's probably instantaneous. This piano probably fell from above right onto this person. And then this is probably a lot later, right? So time there is kind of interesting, but it gets even more interesting in something like this, which is one huge panel. So again, we read from left to right. So the very first thing that happens is this guy saying smile, and the last thing that happens is, sure, you want to move there, Jed. However, all of this is kind of happening in sequence. Like, for example, this instantaneous flash is happening at the same time this guy says smile, Uncle Henry. But we know that a flash is a lot quicker than it in time than it takes to say smile, right? And so this section here, they're reacting to this, and obviously this can't happen in the same exact time. So a lot of stuff is happening in this one panel that can't happen in reality because these people are frozen in time. But the dialogue takes time. So to further expand upon this, when we have no text within a panel, we can see this as an instant, like half of a second, for example, right? That's easy to see. It's just a very quick moment of time. But we're adding in dialogue here where the announcer is saying he's given it his all, folks, which takes about 2 or 3 seconds to say. But clearly the action here within this panel is still half a second or whatever it is, right? So in a sense, this is kind of bending time. It doesn't make sense. But when we turn this text into a caption, this doesn't exist within that world. It's not the announcer saying it, it's the author writing this. That changes the relationship with time because it can be read as instantaneous and the same amount of time that happens with this, right? Where again, with this, it takes about 2 to 3 seconds to say this phrase, which is at odds with the action happening when it's frozen like this. If there was like streaks or motion lines, it would make more sense, but it doesn't here. And that emphasizes the point that dialogue and action within the panel have weird relationships and they're not always equal. Panel size is another effect that can have an effect on time. Like, even though this is kind of these middle panels are the same more or less, this one's longer, this one is framed, this is unframed, this has the same thing 3 times, this is just the single frame. How does that change your perception of the amount of time that passes between the question and the answer, right? Like, to me, this would be a lot quicker than this. To me, having the same panel 3 times indicates stretch time or more time passes. Basically, we're waiting, right? So we have to go through these 3 panels in order to get here. Whereas this, it's a third as easy, right? So it takes more time technically. But you can read this as like even like a minute, whereas this might be a second, or you can say this is a minute and this is 3 seconds. I don't know. It's up to you. So yeah, the weird thing about comics is unlike film where we're watching something go by in real time, the past, present, and future exist simultaneously. So let's just focus on this panel right here. This guy is where let's just say this is the present. Even though this is the present, we can still see to our peripheral vision the past here. And then we can see the future here. Right. So we're kind of time traveling when it comes to comics. Um, it's a really, really bizarre medium when it comes to that. And you could probably do a whole lecture or even a whole course on time in comics, but we'll keep it to that. Interactive comics is a different type of comics. Basically, like if you click here, you'll go to this guy's page. If you click here, you'll go to this guy's page. Kind of interesting, more interactive. Abstract comics, which is actually what got me into comics in the first place, and realizing it's not just superheroes and super masculine stuff or super feminine stuff. So what's the time frame here? How does this relate to time? Abstract comics sort of leave that unanswered, and it's really up to your imagination because they're abstract. You don't see anything referenced in real life like this, more or less. I don't know, it's kind of fun. Another example, another example. This is my internet friend, Gareth A. Hopkins. Probably my favorite abstract artist. Yeah, these are 3 examples of how he does his abstract art. Like right here, for example, on the left-hand side, you can see this continuous, I'm going to call it ocean waves, right? And then we have this blank space right here, which might mean like, are you blinking? Was there a passage in time where you passed out? Maybe nothing happened here. And then here's a little other interruption here. Here's where the images are abstract, but there's text here that might indicate what this text is to you. And here's one where the panels sort of bleed into each other and it's completely abstract, like what's going on. What does it make you think of? Is it metaphorical? Is it just cool looking? Do comics have to have a story, or can they just be sequential art? And the last slide for today is Breaking the Panels with Nancy, which is a really fun comic. She's a little troublemaker. And yeah, you can see her breaking the fourth wall, which is pretty interesting because this comic has been going on for decades, many, many decades. It's made by someone not the original artist. But yeah, what's interesting about this particular comic is that in media, we're familiar with breaking the fourth wall, like Deadpool or whatever. And so maybe this would be weird or mind-blowing to someone like in the 1950s, but now we have this understanding of metatextual narratives that happen. And you can see like not only is she breaking the panels, but also like her mom saw her break the panels, and they're in the comics. So it's kind of cool, trippy, interesting. So yeah, let me stop sharing. But yeah, that was it as far as comics was concerned. I hope that was enjoyable. Hope you learned something new, and hopefully if you weren't sure about comics or have a non-existent relationship with them, maybe you'll reconsider, as I did a few years ago. So thanks for showing up. Thanks for watching this video, and see you on Discord. Bye-bye.